This is the individual oral for language and literature. My literary work is Story of a Body by Robert Haas. My non-literary work is an episode from Friends, the one with all the Thanksgivings, directed by Kevin Bright and written by Gregory S. Malins. My global issue, the body and how it creates misperception of people and how it inflicts psychological damage. My thesis, Haas and the creators of Friends use elements of poetry and film to show how the body inflicts psychological pain on a person. In some ways, for these creators, the body is immoral. My first subject is Robert Haas, and he used elements of poetry to show how the body inflicts psychological pain on others. So let me give you a brief summary first. So there is a young composer who meets a Japanese painter in an art colony. And one day, the young composer confesses his feelings for the Japanese painter. But when the Japanese painter says, "I have lost both my breasts from a double mastectomy," the young composer rejects her. And in response to that, the Japanese painter places a mysterious bowl on his front porch. So the first point I would like to make is Haas uses imagery in the poem as evidence to show how the body inflicts pain on the artist. So let me read the line. The young composer walked back to his own cabin through the pines, and in the morning he found a small blue bowl on the porch outside his door. It looked to be full of rose petals, but he found when he picked it up that the rose petals were on top. The rest of the bowl, she must have swept them from the corners of her studio, was full of dead bees. So the first thing I would like to point out is the shape. So the bowl here represents the breasts that the Japanese painter is missing from her surgery. The second thing I would like to point out is the position of the objects. So if you notice that there's rose petals on top and there's dead bees underneath. And so I believe that the Japanese painter is using this to have a clear message for the young composer. And he's telling the young composer that he only looks at beauty from the surface. And deep inside, he's maybe dead like the bees. The last thing I would like to point out is the colors. So if you notice that there's rose petals, there's bees, and there's a blue bowl. And so all of these together are the primary colors. So red, yellow, blue. And I believe Robert Haas uses the primary colors because it represents her true feelings. And we have to remember that the painter speaks through visuals. So she uses the position of the bowl and the primary colors to show how she really feels about the young composer and his rejection of her. The next point that I would like to make is the usage of punctuation. And Robert Haas uses punctuation to emphasize the young composer's shallow, or rather hollow, nature. So the line is, and this is the point where the young composer rejects her. The radiance that he had carried around in his belly and chest cavity, like music, withered very quickly. So just a couple of images I would like to point out is belly and chest cavity. Robert Haas uses these images to show that this character is hollow inside, this person doesn't have any substance, and we also have to remember that this is a composer, and that instruments are also hollow. Now, in this situation, there's a phrase that Haas writes, like music, and on the sides of like music are two hyphens, and physically or visually in the poem, it looks like there's a hole inside. And I believe that Robert Haas uses this to show the young composer's hollow nature. The last point that I would like to make is that Robert Haas uses a prose poem, and the prose poem functions kind of like a fable. And Robert Haas has a clear message for the readers, and I believe it's our vision can blind us from understanding a person, like the young composer did to the Japanese painter. My second subject is the episode from Friends, and I believe they use elements of film and acting to show how the body inflicts psychological pain on characters. So just a brief background on the character in question. His name is Chandler Bing. The interesting about him is that although he's sarcastic and he has trouble with relationships, he does not alienate his friends. But in this situation, he even finds a way to alienate his friends. So let me first begin with the gesture and lighting. So if you look at the first still, this is where he meets Monica for the first time. And Monica is excited because this is a potential boyfriend. And she says to Ross, Ross? Ross says, oh, Chandler, this is my little sister. Monica says, hi, I'm Ross's little sister. Chandler says in a sarcastic tone, okay. So in this situation, you'll notice that Chandler looks at Monica up and down, already judging her by her physical appearance. And he also has decided her value when he says okay sarcastically. And he's already decided that she's not attractive. If you look at the second still, the creators of Friends make the power of the body more overt. So in this second still, this is where Ross leaves Chandler alone with Monica. And you'll notice that the lighting here even shows the conversation that they have could be painful. So this is the part where Chandler says, it's not that. I just don't want to be stuck all night with your fat sister. And Ross says, hey. If you look at this still, Monica's face already looks horrified. When she leaves that room, her parents ask her to finish the leftovers, and she feels so ashamed about herself that she refuses it. Now, the thing I would like to point out here is the shadow. And I believe the shadow represents the evilness in their conversation. So they both know that calling Monica fat can hurt her. And even Ross says, hey, in an angry tone. So they know that their conversation can inflict damage on a person. The creators of Friends even make it more overt of how the body affects others psychologically as they flash forward. So if you look at the third still, this is the present time, and this is where Chandler and Monica, they're already dating, and this is where he apologizes to her. Chandler says, I called you fat. I don't even remember that. Monica says sarcastically, well, I do. Chandler says, I am so sorry. Come on, Monica. I was an idiot back then. I rushed the stage of a Wham concert, for crying out loud. So at this point, Chandler is trying to humble himself and apologizing to Monica. Now, Wham is a British pop band, and their fan base tends to be young women. And so it would be humiliating for someone who has a male ego like Chandler to be at the concert and to rush the stage like a fan. The last point that I would like to make is this motif. So there's this motif of the transformation of the body in this episode. And I believe that the motif forces the spectators to reconsider the importance of the body. So if you notice that in the last still, this is where Chandler gets his toes cut, and Chandler says, without my toe, I need my toe. And it goes into the flashes forward. He says to Monica, is that why I lost my toe? Because I called you fat? Now, this is not the only scene where the body changes. So Rachel has a rhinoplasty, Ross's father gets his mole cluster removed, and Monica loses weight. And so the creators of Friends use this motif to show us how the body really affects us psychologically. And so in conclusion, Haas and the creators of Friends reveal through their respective mediums how the body creates misperceptions and how the body inflicts psychological pain on others. You talked about the young composer's hollow nature. What is the connection to your thesis statement? What is the connection to causing psychological damage? So, in terms of psychological damage, I believe the victim was the Japanese painter. Um, the young composer has a different function in the poem. He reminds us that we should be careful, or we should be thoughtful about our visuals. He reminds us that we could be ignorant when it comes to visuals. So when the Japanese painter lost her breasts because of an illness, he serves as that. He serves as the ignorance in all people. So when I say what I mean by hollow nature, what I really mean is it represents our ignorance, our lack of depth, our lack of substance. In Friends, you talked about transformation. Can you talk about the other character's reaction to their surgery? Yeah, so this I thought this motif was interesting. Overall, the I think the creators of Friends are trying to show us how much the body can affect people psychologically. So when Rachel gets her rhinoplasty, she looks more attractive. Ross's father even congratulates her on and the doctor's performance in his surgery. When Ross's father gets his mole cluster removed, um, he's elated that how good it looks. Um, when Monica loses weight, this is the main plot in the story. When Monica loses weight, she uses her body as a tool for revenge. So she knows that she's more attractive, and so she's trying to use it to manipulate Chandler. And Chandler Chandler's attracted to her. Chandler tries to hit on her, and in consequence, what happens is that she drops a knife and it cuts off Chandler's toe. Now, in this situation, Chandler gets mutilated, and so he is not quote unquote normal anymore. So when the body gets mutilated like that, he becomes ugly. And so I just think overall that the body can affect a person's reaction or psyche. You said in your thesis statement that the body can be immoral for the creators. Can you elaborate on that? Yeah, what I mean immoral here is that I think the creators have a clear stance on the body and beauty. So, Robert Haas is saying, and I think it's very elementary. I think Robert Haas is saying, you have to look at the person from within and not on the surface. Um, the Japanese painter's surgery was necessary for her to live, and it should not reduce her beauty. It should not reduce her value. It's very elementary, and I think he does it through just imagery and through the elements of poetry. Um, with friends too, they know that the body can be used to manipulate others. So again, like with the main plot, Monica uses her body to attract Chandler, and she's trying to use it to manipulate him. So they know that it has psychological effects. At least the creators do. Um, you mentioned misperception in your thesis statement. Can you talk about it more? Yeah, I think also this is also elementary. Yeah, the body or the psyche of the body should not influence the substance of a person. So, even though that Monica was overweight, Chandler should still appreciate her. Even though the Japanese painter had a surgery, the young composer should still appreciate her beauty in her artwork, or Monica's beauty in her friendship, in her skills, and her companionship. And so what happens here is that the body kind of fogs who someone really is. And it's a kind of a very fable-esque idea.